Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's all agree that we have a humanitarian crisis on the border that needs to be addressed. I want to confine my questioning on the definition of the problem, and what we really should be talking about here is the definition of the problem is unaccompanied children, and what we're debating is whether we need to spend more money and how we should, if we do spend, how it should be spent. I want to first start off by asking, in a sentence, just a sentence, what is the achievable policy goal we should be addressing right now? Mr. Schwartz.
From the Department of Justice perspective, the achievable policy goal is to work with these countries, the three source countries in particular, to build their justice systems so that they can address these issues in the first instance, lessen the likelihood that there will be a spur.
Okay, good. Again, one sentence. Mr. Shannon.
To build partnerships with Mexico as a transit and designation country, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador.
Okay, again, no, you're missing the mark. Our goal needs to stop the flow. Right now we have to deal with 57,000 unaccompanied minors that came to this country. Secretary Johnson said it would be 90,000 potentially by the end of this fiscal year, over 100,000 by the beginning of 2015. We have to stop the flow. That's the achievable goal. I don't think we can achieve solving the drug problem or improving their economies or reducing violence in these. I don't think that's an achievable goal. I don't care how much money we spent on it, and we'll talk about some data to talk about that. I've seen that exact same chart. I've done a fair amount of, that Senator Risch was talking about. I've done a fair amount of calculations on that. Mr. Schwartz, do you know what percent of these unaccompanied children we've sent back over the last 5 years?
Senator, I understand that you've asked for that information from the Department of Justice.
So your answer is no.
We are obtaining that information.
Okay, so your answer is, I've got it.
I don't have it. Thank you.
Since 2009, we have returned roughly 16,800 children out of 174,000 unaccompanied minors who have come to this country. So that's a rate of 9.6%. So more than 90% of those children are still in this country. Now, over time, it has really declined. So in 2009, we returned about 23,000. 2010, a little under 22. 2011, under 19. 2012, with deferred action on childhood arrivals, it dropped to 8.6. Once deferred action on childhood arrivals was fully implemented, we're down to 4.3. So looking at what Senator Risch was talking about, I think it's pretty obvious what is a real correlated cause to the spike in unaccompanied children. I want to talk about the push factor and how unrealistic it is that we can spend any amount of money on it. Just telling you what we've already spent. In just the last 3 years, we've spent $956 million as U.S. economic assistance to those three countries. In terms of drug control, we spent $76 billion to control drugs. Do you really think throwing a few $100 million down there is going to solve that problem at all? I would say not. Let's talk about murder rates. Mr. Shannon, you said that the pressure is building. The fact of the matter is in El Salvador, murder rates spiked in 2011 at 70 per 100,000. It's down to 40. Guatemala was actually declined from 46 per 100,000 in 2008 down to 40 now. Honduras, it built up to 91 in 2011. It's down to 87 in 2013. And by the way, just put that in perspective, the murder rate in Detroit in 2012 was 54.6. In New Orleans, 53.2. So, we can talk about this push factor, but I would really be looking more at the policy pull factor in terms of causing this. And I also want to just talk about spending in general. We have spent a lot of money in terms of ICE and Customs Border Patrol and U.S. Customs and Immigration Services and HHS refugee programs. In 2008, we spent $17.5 billion on those programs. You divide it by the 1.2 million removals and returns in 2008, that's about $14,900 per deportation or removal. Okay, 14,000. In 2012, we spent $21.4 billion. Divided about 650,000 removals and returns, that's about $33,000 per removal or return. So really the number of immigrants, because I would argue very bad economic times. There's not as many economic activities. We have fewer immigrants coming illegally into this country. We spend a lot of money on a per-person basis in terms of what agencies have to spend their money on in terms of the individuals. We've more than doubled spending since 2008. Why do we need another $3.7 billion? And is it going to have any effect whatsoever? Mr. Shannon.
I believe it will. The immediate impact, of course, will be to allow us to manage the flow of people coming across the border in a better fashion, in a faster fashion, and in a fashion that allows us to determine those who have protection needs and those who don't. And those who don't will be deported in a timely fashion.
But how do you answer the fact that we've actually doubled spending from $14,000 per return or removed immigrant to over $33,000 in 2012? We've more than doubled spending. Why do we need more? Why are we spending it so ineffectively?
Well, as a corollary to that question, so that the committee can understand, is all the spending on border enforcement just related to returns? Isn't that the equivalent of a police department and what we spend in a police department if we were to divide it in the number of arrests and convictions? So I want to get a total picture here, because if we're going to say that all of this money is divided into the number of deportees, well, then we can take a lot of people off the border that our border states have asked us for in terms of enforcement, so that people will be deterred from even coming or interdicted when they come.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just trying to provide some reasonableness.
And I'm trying to make sure that we're talking about the same thing.
Well, of course, we would need more time to really vet these numbers properly, so we really understand what's happening. We were in our meeting yesterday, and Sylvia Burwell talked about, well, how much is it going to cost per bed, per child, per day? And her answer was somewhere between $250 and $1,000 per day. And her defense of the $1,000, well, you know, if we can't plan for it, it's really expensive to do it. I mean, if I don't plan on a vacation properly, I'm still not paying $1,000 per day to, stay at the most expensive hotel. So again, the debate here we're having is, does this administration, who apparently didn't plan on this, even though their action caused it, does it really need another $3.7 billion, or do we have enough already built into a base budget to handle this? And by the way, if we're going to spend money trying to solve the drug problem, the crime problem, the violence problem in those Central American countries, is that just a pipe dream that we're going to have any effect whatsoever on that?
Senator, if I could address that, I don't think it's a pipe dream. And I think we have examples where we've had a transformative effect on the criminal justice systems of countries. We've done it in Colombia, we've done it in the Balkans, and it's been for the benefit and the national security of the United States as well. We have to engage with these countries. Their criminal justice problems are our criminal justice problems as well.
But we have engaged to the tune of $1 billion over the last 3 years, just economically. Thank you.
Senator Flake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That Senator Corker asked for unanimous consent to include in the record Table 39 from Department of Homeland Security and Force Alien Removal Module. I'd ask for unanimous consent to have my summary of that table, and I'd like to
Without objection.
I'd like to speak to it because I'd like to provide the full and complete picture in terms of removals and returns, which is what I think the American people would really view as deportation. So, while it is true in terms of formal removals, which is what I believe the chair was referring to when he said that President Obama is sometimes referred to as the deportation king. Formal removals, President Obama is ahead of the pace of President Bush's both first and second term. And removals are defined as removals are the compulsory and confirmed movement of an inadmissible or deportable alien out of the United States based on an order of removal. An alien who is removed and has administrative or criminal consequences placed on subsequent reentry owing to the fact of the removal. Okay, that's what a removal is. A return, on the other hand, are the confirmed movement of an inadmissible or deportable alien out of the United States, not based on an order of removal. Now, I think what we're really trying to do, if we're trying to speed up the process, I think we really want more returns as opposed to removals, which take a whole adjudication process, which is taking years and creating even more incentives for people to come. So let me just lay out the facts in terms of President Obama's record on removals and returns, which is what I think most Americans would view as total deportations. In his first term, President Obama had about 1.58 million removals, 1.6 million returns, for a total of 3.2 million what I would consider deportations, okay, as a broadly viewed term. President Bush, on the other hand, in his second term, had about 1.2 million removals, compared to President Obama's 1.6, okay? But in terms of returns, he had 3.8 million versus President Obama's 1.6. So total removal and returns of President Bush's second term, 4 years versus 4 years, was 5 million removals and returns under the Bush administration, 3.2 million returns and removals under President Obama. In President Bush's entire term, both terms, there are about 10.3 million removals and returns. So I just don't think we're being complete in our description of what President Obama has actually done, because if you combine the two, his record is definitely lagging President Bush's in previous administrations in terms of actually removals and returns. Again, 5 million for President Bush's second term, 3.2 million for President Obama's first term. But again, I think that just provides a more complete record of what the problem is there. I'm not sure whether you were here during my first line of questioning, but I'd like to give the witnesses the exact opportunity. Please, in a sentence, maybe two, I've got a little bit more time. What should be the achievable goal of U.S. policy? Achievable goal. I'll start with Mr. Johnson.
Our goals in foreign policy are to protect our country, to defend our nation and defend our citizens and protect our borders. In doing that, we have a foreign policy that works with other countries to develop alliances. And
okay, let me just stop you there. Let me define what I'm achievable goal on unaccompanied children. We have this humanitarian crisis on the border. 57,000 currently in this fiscal year. Secretary Johnson said it could be 90,000 by the end of this fiscal year, so by September 30th, over 100,000 by 2015. So again, what I'm talking about is what is the achievable goal to solve the problem of unaccompanied children. So let's, and again, keep it brief because I think this can be described pretty briefly.
Well, with due respect, Senator, immigration policy and border policy are beyond the scope of my current responsibilities, and so I defer that question to the other witnesses.
Okay. Ms. Arnson?
Yeah. The achievable goal. One would be to speed up the process by which children who might have legitimate cases for asylum or refugee status are heard, so that waiting time in the hundreds of thousands of cases that are in the docket is rapidly gone through, and to speed up, the process without violating U.S. law and international law regarding the claims of people who potentially have requests. That's the very short term. The longer term, of course, is to contribute to a more stable and prosperous and safe Central America, and that is the long-term goal, I think, that has to be the focus of this committee, but also an important objective of U.S. foreign policy.
But based on your answer, what you're telling me is that long-term goal is probably not achievable in the short term. And let me just ask you, what is the speeding up of the process of adjudication? That's a goal to achieve what? Why do you want to speed up the adjudication process?
To speed it up so that the backlog does not exist and send a message that is therefore exploited by traffickers to play on people's fears and hopes that once they get to the country they will stay for some number of months or stretching into years, so that those cases can be speeded up, that there's an expanded process of hearings, an expanded process, and a more expeditious process.
So you're saying the goal would be to send a message to the smugglers so that they no longer send children to America unaccompanied. So again, I'm just trying to focus in on, wouldn't the goal in that case be to stop the flow?
I think the goal is to contribute to conditions that no longer serve as incentives to the flow. The principal cause, I believe, is not you know, the misimpression, although the rumors are certainly spread by these unscrupulous trafficking groups, but the critical driver is violence. And if you look at the places of origin of the children that have come as part of this 52,000, you know, this fiscal year, and you look at the levels of violence in the sending areas, those are the most violent places in Central America.
I did point out early in questioning that the murder rate in both New Orleans and Detroit are comparable to one or two of those countries in Central America. I don't have the graph right here, so we have violence as well. Just real quick, Ms. Nazario, what would you say is the goal, our short-term achievable goal to address the unaccompanied children problem?
I think the short-term achievable goal is to protect children from being sent back to death. And I think there's a humane, practical approach that is not being discussed by the Senate. I am concerned that children are released, and too many of them do not show up for their court hearings. And if you were a 7-year-old child and didn't have an attorney, you wouldn't show up for your court hearing either. I think you can hold these children for 60 to 90 days. A limited amount of time would be humane in refugee facilities or even the facilities we currently have. Bring in immigration judges, spend money on that, and adjudicate their cases quickly. Give them a full, fair hearing with someone who knows how to do child-sensitive interviewing techniques. Provide that child with an attorney, so it's not a sham process. And if they do qualify, and to answer your previous question, 40 to 60% of these children do qualify for some existing relief to stay in this country. Very few of them are getting that because they don't have attorneys. But if they do qualify, then let them into this country and increase the number of refugees and asylees that we take. And if they don't qualify, if they're economic migrants, then deport them immediately. And that message will get back to those countries. If you're coming for economic reasons, and there are parts of Honduras, and there are people who are doing that, then send them back, and that will send a message. And that option is, and I'm not popular in some human rights groups for saying keep these kids in detention, but that will force them to go through the process and not simply be released and sometimes show up to court. And by the way, they're much more likely to show up to court if they have an attorney, and these cases go much more quickly if they have an attorney. But if they are a refugee, I think we are a compassionate country, and we will let people in. And if they are not, then deport them quickly, and that will send a message.
I mean, I agree, we are compassionate, we want to treat these kids with real humanity, but I am also highly concerned about parents making that decision, sending their kids on that very dangerous journey. I'm concerned about those kids as well. And we, you know, from my standpoint, our primary goal has to be to stop the flow, deter parents from making that choice. If we have asylum, cases, those should be requested in the home countries. And if we need to beef up resources, I would say let's do it in the home countries. Let's not incentivize people to come here, take that very dangerous, very awful journey.
I think we need to do both. We need to have more in-country processing, the ability to apply for refugee status in these 3 countries. So those children, I mean, I spent 3 months making that journey, and I had post-traumatic stress, and believe me, many children die and lose arms and legs on that journey. You don't want that. So you do need to beef up that ability to do that in those 3 home countries.
Okay.
And we haven't done that.
Well, thank you again. It's very important that we define the goal, define an achievable goal, so we can design policy to actually make that goal happen.
What I've defined is achievable.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank